do recall afterwards, we went and had a quiet drink in a pub just around the corner from our hotel, and everything was pretty quiet in Dublin that night, and we were thinking, what would it have been like if Ireland had won?
It's very rare the All Blacks go into a game as underdogs, especially the World Cup, and we were not favoured against them in 2023.
Yeah, the big bogey hanging over them then was this inability to get past the quarterfinals. They've never done it. They still haven't done it.
DSPN, the Devlin Sports Podcast Network.
DSPN, Tony Johnson with us. So a couple of different aspects to the podcast today. We're building up to the Irish Test, of course. There's a big chat about that, about the expectations, about who's going to be available, about what team is going to be selected. Time now just to look back a little bit of history. And we've done this with the South Africans this year, and we've done this with Australia this year, Tone. I love this. And I've asked you for your top three Ireland versus All Blacks tests. These are my three for what it's worth. You'll see up on the graphics there. In no particular order, I've got 1978 just because it means a lot to me, because it's the first test of that first Grand Slam tour, and I remember getting up in the middle of the night. 2023, being in the stadium for that quarterfinal win at the World Cup, when I genuinely didn't think we were going to win that game. Ireland won an 18-match winning streak, and I went in there crazy thinking, oh my God, the All Blacks are going to lose this guy. And we produced the best performance in a couple of years. We were magnificent that day. And then obviously the significance of 2022, and I could have picked the Dunedin Test, their first one that they won here, but the Wellington Test, where they smoked us that day, and they deserved to win the series. So those three, there's so many that you could pick out, but those were my three on the list. More important, what are yours?
Yeah, I suppose one of the first memories I have of rugby between New Zealand and Ireland came on the 1972-73 tour, and that we mentioned before about Ireland got a draw and they denied the All Blacks the Grand Slam. But then you go forward to 78, the Grand Slam tour. It wasn't a great game. It was anything but. The All Blacks, remember, had lost on the Tuesday to Munster, and many of those players fronted up again on the Saturday for the test match at Lansdowne Road. And with time almost up, it was 6-all. 2 penalties to Ireland. Doug Bruce, that solid boot of the man.
God, he was good, wasn't he?
Oh,
what a great player that man was. Doug
Bruce, 2 drop goals, and then the line out. Andy Dalton scoring around the front of the line out. And that sort of set the tone for that Grand Slam tour, where everything except the game against England was won probably in the last minute.
Can I just mention Doug Bruce for one thing? I remember him as a kid, and if I saw the footage, I hope I'm right. I just remember stuck behind our goalpost, constantly winning lineouts, and he would just boot it 30 or 40 metres up the touchline. He was so reliable, wasn't he, that guy?
Yeah.
He was Dan Carter before Dan Carter in terms of that
he was a
aspect
different kind of player to Dan Carter in that he wasn't a runner.
No, he wasn't. But God, he was reliable, wasn't he?
Well, he had that left boot. He was a school teacher, and he was from up a hooker, I think, was in inland Canterbury. Doug Bruce, I got to know him quite well because he became a broadcaster after he finished, and he was those drop goals. I remember one he got in South Africa after Sid Gowing had passed the ball back between his legs, almost like American football style, and he drop kicked a goal there. So yeah, that was Dougie Bruce, and he'd kept us in that Test match with those 2 drop goals. 2013. Was the game where the All Blacks had to come from a long way back, and that incredible finish. They were 22-7 down at half-time. They closed it up to 22-17 with 6 minutes to play. And then Johnny Sexton had a chance to put the game potentially out of reach. That the All Blacks were within a converted try of winning the game, within a try of drawing the game. And they wanted to win because they wanted to complete that unbeaten year. And I think it was, I can't remember at what point, but it was, it was quite late in the piece. He had a penalty attempt. They'd gone for a drive towards the line. It had been collapsed. So he had a penalty shot, 15 in from touch on the 22. And he took forever to line it up. There was no shot clock in those days.
All right.
And it was one of those moments, you're sitting there in the crowd thinking, why is he taking so long? And in the end, he pushed it to the right.
The moment got to him.
And that potentially, there was some talk that he'd been cramping a bit, that he was maybe struggling a little bit out there, but a goal that normally Johnny Sexton would kick with his eyes closed, he pushed it wide. That gave the All Blacks the chance. And there were a couple of times where the two teams kicked the ball to each other and you think, what are they doing? Then at 79 minutes and 35 seconds, the All Blacks won a penalty on their own 10-metre mark. And Richie McCaw took off, but Nigel Owens called them back and said, no, there's the mark there. And so off they went. And I think it went through 24 passes and 10 or 11 rucks.
Wow.
And they just kept pushing and pushing. And it took over 2 minutes, like that whole flowing movement. And what was incredible about it was the support play, that every time the All Blacks took the ball into contact, there were players there to clean out. They knew their role. They had to make sure that that ball came back so that they could keep the movement going. And there were a couple of key moments in it. Liam Messam made a really good break or inroad down the right-hand side, got them quite close to the goal line. And then there was a terrific cutout pass thrown by Aaron Cruden, and Dane Coles popped the offload to Ryan Crotty, goes in the corner. And the crowd was stunned. And if you listen to the BBC commentary of the game, it was Eddie Butler calling the game with Keith Wood, or Woody, great player.
The bionic potato.
Yeah. And as the try gets scored, there's this loud banging noise, which may have been Woody's fist hitting the table in frustration. But then, of course, the drama wasn't over because they had to go to the TMO. It was Graham Hughes. There were 2 passes that they checked, but they calmly handled it, and you could tell that neither of the passes was forward. So the try stood, and then Cruden from right out on the sideline had a shot at goal. They charged early. And so Nigel Owens sent them back. And this time he got to take a second shot with no one charging, and he nailed it. And it was really eerie because I was standing on the sideline because I had to get out to do the post-match interviews. And all I could hear was the All Blacks whooping and hollering. You couldn't hear anything else. I'm sure there was some noise in the stadium, but it felt like that was the only sound that was going on there. It was an incredible moment. I do recall afterwards we went and had a quiet drink in a pub just around the corner from our hotel, and everything was pretty quiet in Dublin that night. And we were thinking, what would it have been like if Ireland had won? And I think the comment was passed around the group was, well, when they do, I'd love to be there because you know what it would mean to them. And of course, that happened 3 years later.
Yeah. So in 1997, we'd won every single game and we drew with England on the very last game. This was 2013 and the All Blacks won every single test. I think that's the only time in the professional era
that it had been done.
That we'd been done. So really significant.
Oh, huge. Yeah. And again, just this incredible history of drama. Because there was a test match in Christchurch, you'll remember too, where Dan Carter got a drop goal right at the end.
And then we tailed them by 60 in the next game.
In the next game.
All right, number 3 is what?
Okay, so I'm going to go to Chicago. Look, the All Blacks didn't get their selection right for that game. Ireland were well fired up for it. The All Blacks went in just a little bit underpowered up front. Locking combination. Paddy Tuipulotu was still quite new to Test rugby at that point. And Jerome Kaino played lock.
That's right. Yes, he did too.
And the replacement lock on the bench was Scott Barrett, who came on for his first test. And they had to get him out there at half-time because the line-out went into meltdown in the first half. They just didn't have enough line-out strength. But Ireland got out to a lead again, and the All Blacks started coming back at them in the second half. It was a horrible first half because I think Joe Moody got yellow carded after about 7 minutes. And there'd been that prequel to the game too, where the Irish had lined up in a
V.
An 8.
An 8. Oh, that's right.
Yeah, Axel Foley.
That's right. It was. Yeah,
Anthony
I knew it was something. Yeah,
died. Just we couldn't see it because the American TV pictures that we were dealing with just didn't give us the right angle, so we couldn't quite see what was going on there. But so that fired the Irish up. Of course, Joe Schmidt had a plan, carried it out to perfection, but the All Blacks did come back at them, and then Robbie Henshaw, I think about 75 minutes, scored a brilliant try, stepped his way through the defence, and you knew then that this was going to be their day.
History, yeah.
And what I remember about that a lot was just that Ireland had every right to be cock-a-hoop and whooping and hollering. And you think about what happened after some of the games subsequent to that, some of the mouthing off that went on. Not on that occasion. The humility of the Irish players. And I remember Dane Coles talking about it when we interviewed him for the Behind the Silver Fern book. And he said the thing that he remember was, obviously they're gutted, they're sitting in the dressing room, and in comes Rory Best with his son. And Rory Best, what a proud moment for him, this real leader of this Irish team, comes in and plonks himself down, introduces his son to Dane Coles, and they have a beer together. And Dane Cole said, that's the measure of the man. And there was, as I say, there was a great deal of joy and pride. But we were out that night. We went to a couple of blues bars, and you run into Irish supporters. There was no gloating. It was just really what an amazing game, and you kind of felt happy for them because the demons of over 100 years had been exorcised. They finally got their win. And sure, it was disappointing for the All Blacks, but really it was a terrific milestone performance by the Irish, and of course it set everything up for that game 2 weeks later, which was one of the most brutal test matches I've seen.
About 3 of them went off, didn't they? Head kind of knocks.
Well, and the All Blacks got a bit lucky because Malakai Fekitoa was very lucky that he wasn't red carded for a high shot that he put in. A couple of years later, it probably, would have been, yeah. But they hung on to win that game, and as I say, that's when things changed.
Yeah, they've become a real rival. They're a real rival ever since, haven't they?
And suddenly there's this expectation. We've done it once. Now we're playing them on our turf, and we're going to do it again. And when it didn't happen, the atmosphere wasn't quite as magnanimous as it had been 2 weeks. But that's just human nature. But since then, I guess with that rivalry becoming really fierce, things started to get a little bit gnarly, didn't it? I mean, when Ireland came out here and won, and you talk to a lot of Irish pundits and people involved in the game, as I do, and they'll tell you that winning in New Zealand was actually probably more important than winning that game in Chicago.
Much more significant. And winning a series against us as well. It wasn't
and
just
winning a
series.
Yeah. And then, of course, there was the famous, there was a bit of verbal at the end of it, with particularly directed by Peter O'Mahony
at Sam Cane.
Yep.
And that flowed on to then Rico and Sexton having a crack at in 2023.
Well, and also I think Brodie Retallick gave Peter O'Mahony his 10 cents worth at the end of the game.
At the end of that game,
yeah.
I mean, look, you could add that one to it, Tony. I mean, and this is why, leave us a comment about your favourite ones, but, that's why after that 2022 series, I say it's one of my favourites because it's very rare the All Blacks go into a game as underdogs, especially the World Cup, and we were not favoured against them in 2023. And we put in a lion performance. We really did. Like we played like the All Blacks do when our backs are against the wall.
Well, you talk about that passage of play leading up to the try that they scored in the game in Dublin that we're talking about, 2013, and all those passes, all those rucks and the accuracy. And I think that was the hallmark of the All Black team through that era, that when they got into a tight situation, and the game in Christchurch was another example of it, but you always felt as long as there was only one score in it and there was time on the clock, that the All Black team could do it, because you had those great players dotted throughout the team. They had tremendous connections, whether they had the ball or they didn't have the ball. And so they trusted each other, they backed each other, and if everyone did their job, and it might be hitting a ruck, hitting a ruck, going in with someone, hitting a ruck and making sure that ball came back. And if everyone did their job, they would find a way to score.
When you're talking this, I'm just thinking of Ma and the boot off against South Africa was another one, wasn't it? It was almost like an NFL game. Last team with the ball was going to win the game, and if we had the ball last, you always felt confident that we would get a chance to score.
Look, it doesn't always happen.
No, of course not.
Because something can happen, a heroic piece of defence or a ball gets spilt. But by and large, that was the hallmark of that team. And I think we saw the residuals of that in that game that you're talking about at the last World Cup, in the quarter-final, where Ireland were heavily backed to beat the All Blacks in that, on recent form. But of course, the big bogey hanging over them then was this inability to get past the quarterfinals. They've never done it. They still haven't done it. This time it came down to a massive number of phases, probably even more.
Oh, it felt like 100, Tony, in the ground.
Where they didn't have the ball, and they just had to keep making tackles until either the ball got spelt or someone saw the opportunity for the turnover. And on that occasion, and I know when we talked about the history between New Zealand and South Africa, we talked about the great moment of Sam Whitelock winning that line out in the semi-final at Twickenham in 2015. Well, it was Sam Whitelock again. Yeah. And, if you look at it closely and you think, well, if there was a clear release, it was only for a fraction of a second. It was a hairline call, but
he got it.
He got it, and that was the end of the game. And those are the moments that great matches are made of, and just so happens the ones we've been talking about, the All Blacks came up with those big moments. But then as I say, Ireland in between that, they've certainly had their success. And so now, bona fide, this is one of the great rivalries. It was always a wonderful rivalry, but now it's one of the most fierce rivalries in the game, which makes this match this weekend so appetising.
This is the DSPN.